Now that the big, beautiful bill has passed, President Donald Trump's economy is set to soar. However, there's been one major holdup in all of this, and that's been too late Jerome Powell, chairman of the Fed. And there's been some absolutely crazy news developing with Jerome Powell, a new scandal unfolding, it looks like, unbelievably, as well as some rumors circulating about his current status when it comes to employment. I'm going to cover that all right now on American Advocates. If you haven't been paying attention, President Donald Trump is not a fan of Jerome Powell. However, the feeling seems to be mutual, as Jerome Powell doesn't seem to be a big fan of President Donald Trump or a lot of his policies, especially his tariffs. And despite President Trump's amazing work on our U.S. economy ever since taking office, Jerome Powell has refused to lower interest rates, grinding the gears of President Donald Trump and causing him to get very frustrated. Articles like this pop up. Jerome Powell says Fed would have lowered rates already if it weren't for tariffs. Jerome Powell and a bunch of other liberal economists predicted that President Donald Trump's tariffs were going to be disastrous for our nation, that within 3 months we were going to be in a recession, heading towards a Great Depression, with a massive stock market crash underway. And with inflation skyrocketing as well, just driving the prices up and making everyday life for Americans incredibly hard. But has that actually happened? First and foremost, let's take a look at the inflation markers. From Truflation itself, breaking U.S. inflation index drops to 1.66%. The experts are fuming, he writes. Cut interest rates. If you've been paying attention to my channel, then you knew this was imminent. Because as I've explained in other videos, tariffs are not inflationary, despite what liberal economists would have you believe, and apparently despite what Jerome Powell himself believes. They're actually de facto deflationary, and I've explained that to a degree in other videos, so I'm not going to explain it again, but this is literally what we're witnessing happen. Jerome Powell literally has no excuse to not lower the interest rates. I actually enjoy this remark by Insurrection Barbie on X, because it points out some obvious truths and hypocrisies with Jerome Powell. So Jerome Powell refused to raise interest rates when Biden was president and spending money like it was monopoly money. But now that inflation is below 2%, he won't lower interest rates. Totally apolitical, said no one ever. And that's exactly it. Jerome Powell was like a different man under the Biden administration. I mean, with Biden, we're talking about a president who under his administration saw sky-high inflation. We were at 9.1% inflation rate under Joe Biden. I want to point out something too. The supposed stock market crash that was coming, the Great Depression that was imminent because of these Trump tariffs. It's not coming. The stock market is performing amazing, mostly hitting record highs. The Dow Jones at $44,459.65 to close out July 14th. The S&P 500 has been hitting new unprecedented heights, up 3.9% from last month. And the same goes for the NASDAQ, 4.77% increase last month alone. But it gets even better than that. You see, President Donald Trump's tariffs, the ones that they said were going to absolutely ruin our economy, cause inflation to soar, the stock market to crash, etc., aren't just having the opposite effect on the stock market and on inflation as predicted, but they're having unforeseen positive effects like a budget surplus for the month of June. The first time America has had that in 20 years. Take a look at this.
The federal government ran a massive $27 billion surplus, which is for the month of June, which is an extraordinary thing. The fact that we're running a surplus at all,
yes.
And when you look back and think about all the poo-pooing that the media did, and all of the economic experts who said this would never happen and Trump was going to destroy the economy, they are all been proved wrong by this one man, Donald Trump.
A budget surplus is absolutely crazy. Tariff revenues are coming in hot, and we are profiting off of them at an insane rate. In fact, this article points to the amount of tariff revenue America has generated since Liberation Day. Trump's tariff revenues are hitting record highs, generating $100 billion so far this year. Tariff revenues topped a record $113 billion for the first time during the fiscal year, a revelation that comes as President Donald Trump imposed imposes nearly weekly duties on some of the world's largest economies. The U.S. received more than $27 billion in customs duties in June, the highest figure so far this year according to the Treasury Department's customs and certain excise taxes data. Compared to last June, this year's figures are up 301%. And so what's the problem here? What is the holdup from too late Jerome Powell and the Fed? The only thing we can point to is he is a case of TDS, Trump derangement syndrome. It has to be, because there's no logical reason that he should look at anything going on and decide to not cut the interest rates. President Donald Trump is getting fed up also. Just yesterday at the White House Faith Office luncheon, he called Jerome Powell stupid. A knucklehead, he said. Take a listen.
And it came from, good business skill. And I've always made money. Now I'm making it for you people. I've had good days and bad days, but in good days and bad days, I always found a way to make money, and we have to do that for our country. But and we did 188 billion in Scott just now, 188 billion in tariffs, 188, and we haven't even started yet. That's only for cars and steel. We actually have barely started. The economy is roaring, business confidence is soaring, incomes are up, prices are down, and inflation is dead. It's dead. We have a bad Fed chairman, really bad. If he would lower the rates, and I tried being nice to the guy, it doesn't help. He's like a knucklehead. No, he's a knucklehead. A stupid guy. He really is. Each point, think of this, each point costs us $360 billion.
Jerome Powell's absolute stupidity and stubbornness is costing us an insane amount of money. And currently, Jerome Powell has our interest rate set to 4.5%. Here's the funny part. Listen to how the liberal media twists all of this up when it comes to Jerome Powell.
And it's really self-defeating. The more that the president pressures the Federal Reserve, the more that the committee at the Federal Reserve, which is really what sets interest rates, is in a bind because they are supposed to set interest rate policy independent of the president. If there's a perception that they are bowing to the will of the president, it will undermine their credibility on fighting inflation. And that will actually lead interest rates over time to go higher, which is the reverse of what the president wants.
What? If you ever needed an argument on why the Fed should be completely abolished, it was it right there. And who was that lady speaking, mind you? She was the vice chair of the Fed under Joe Biden. So that's not even a news anchor saying this. This is a quote-unquote expert and a prime example of somebody that's worked in the Fed. This is their thought process. Oh, well, the president has asked us, within reason, mind you, because inflation just keeps dropping every month and is now at super low lows. Now that the president is being so public and putting pressure on us to lower the interest rates, well, we can't do it now because he asked. So how does the Fed operate? It's not going off economic markers. It just goes off of, well, we can't be seen to appear weak. I mean, what is this? The Sopranos? Is this the mafia? You have to keep up your appearances. Big, strong, mighty Fed. The president demands you lower interest rates and backs it up with economic performance and low inflation. But because he asked publicly and he's putting pressure on, the answer is no. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Let me break it down for you very simply. As I discussed, inflation rate at 1.66%. Jerome Powell currently has our interest rate set at 4.5%. Why is that egregious? It's poor economic practice. With an inflation rate at 1.66%, a nice, very generous, and very kind, I like you, Mr. President, interest rate should be right around 2.16%. If he wanted to go higher, it would be acceptable to match the inflation rate plus 1, so 2.66%. We're currently at 4.5. He can afford to lower our interest rate by 2 points, at least, maybe even closer to 2.5. And as the president said, President Donald Trump said, each point essentially is going to cost America $300 billion when the government essentially goes to try and refinance debt. Jerome Powell is essentially, potentially, costing us anywhere between $600 billion to $750 billion by being stubborn. All because He doesn't like Trump's tariff policies. And his answer with all of this is, well, if I lower the interest rates, the inflation could go up. Yeah, I got news for you, Jerome Powell. I'd actually bet money on the fact that the inflation rate will go up at some point in time. Isn't that something? Wow. Well, if I buy a stock in the stock market, the stock could go down. Yeah, it could. It also likely will go back up. It fluctuates. With somebody like President Donald Trump in office, the inflation is still going to fluctuate. But I guarantee you this, it's continued to trend down since he got in office, and President Donald Trump, more than any other president, is going to do the best possible job keeping it cooled. Jerome Powell's literal only reason for this is hypothetical. That is not good economic practice. He's literally ignoring logic, stats, and facts in front of his face and going off of feelings. But alas, there is hope. There are rumors that Jerome Powell is ready to quit, ready to resign, and not even so much from the pressure of President Donald Trump demanding, essentially at this point, that he does for not lowering interest rates. But this is sort of a semi-mini Fed scandal going on here. This has come to light under Jerome Powell's supervision. He's now under fire for cost overruns. Powell asks a watchdog to review the Fed's $2.5 billion renovation plan. And what does this have to do with? They're renovating the Fed building, and they've been renovating the Fed building. And somehow, the cost of the renovation has been driven up to an astronomical $2.5 billion. And so you're hearing this right. Not only is this guy costing America potentially up to $750 billion by being stubborn and not lowering interest rates despite every important economic marker indicating that he should, but on top of that, he's mismanaging the funds and the renovation going on in his own building that he's overseeing, and now he's costing America even more money. And that's why there's rumors circulating, finally, that Jerome Powell seems to be ready to step down. Kevin Hassett says it best in this interview right here.
The bottom line is, from my perspective, that when the Federal Reserve was created, we were under a gold standard. And the idea that the Fed could print money and then spend $2.5 billion on a building without real congressional oversight, it didn't occur to the people that framed the Federal Reserve Act. And so I think that we've got a real problem of oversight and excess spending. And to put it in perspective, the cost overrun right now is $700 million. The second biggest renovation of a building that we've ever had in the history of D.C. was the Federal Reserve Building, the FBI building. And the FBI building, the whole thing cost about the same as this cost overrun at the Fed. And so I think that we definitely need to rethink the way the Fed's acting. We 100% want independent monetary policy, but it sure looks like they need more congressional oversight on things like the way they build their buildings.
I agree with everything he said there, except that very part at the end. I don't know if we want separate monetary policy. With all that being said, do you think President Donald Trump should get rid of Jerome Powell as chairman of the Fed before 2026 when his time as chairman of the Fed is over? Maybe replace him with Scott Bessent? Scott is phenomenal and would probably kill it in that role. Let me know what you think. Subscribe to American Advocates if you enjoyed this content, and like the video unless you love being too late all the time, just like your hero, Jerome Powell. If that's the case, dislike this video and never come back.